Brandon Price was the only child in the family of a wealthy businessman. From an early age, he got only the best from his parents and grew up a smart and curious boy. Brandon did not spend his money on trendy clothes or entertainment in nightclubs, but invested it in his education. Ultimately, this allowed the boy to graduate from a prestigious university and delve into the business world. Despite the fact that nature had given Brandon a pleasant appearance, his personal life was complicated. Of course, Brandon would get tons of attention from girls, but the fact that most of them were only attracted to his expensive car and the gold watch on his wrist upset him. Brandon wanted girls to appreciate him as a person, not as a rich kid, and this made him generally sad. At times, the boy would go into a real state of depression, and this did not go unnoticed by his father. During these occasions, Stephen Price once said to his son, "Brandon, you shouldn't be so downbeat. Believe me, the right girl will show up in your life." "I don't know, Dad. Was Mom like most girls? Did she not fall for the money when she first met you?" Brandon asked, distrust in his voice. In response, Mr. Price smiled slyly and told his son about a trick he used in his youth to test the feelings of girls he liked. What he would do was he would feign being sad and tell his next girlfriend that his business had been taken over by creditors due to his debts and that he was now a beggar. Of course, after these words, most girls instantly lost interest in the bankrupt businessman. But among those gold diggers, Mr. Price was lucky to meet Scarlett, who later became his wife. Upon learning of her husband's financial problems, Scarlett didn't leave him, no. She took her gold jewelry and rushed to the pawn shop to pawn them and help out financially. That's my suggestion to you, son. Don't rush into marriage. Look around and pick a person you like, someone you'll go hand in hand with in life, Mr. Price advised. Even though his father's story interested him, he decided to put his advice on the side and come back to it only if he needed to. Trying to unwind and distract himself, Brandon went to a nightclub, where a young crowd was already partying. Though he had recently turned 29, he looked much younger and therefore attracted not just women of the same age, but also very young girls. Of course, Brandon knew that his fancy clothes and the fancy car he parked outside were to blame for this. But tonight, the club was unusually empty, and Brandon soon noticed a pretty girl sitting bored at a table in the corner. Smiling, the young businessman offered the girl a dance, and she, as he expected, of course agreed. Here we go. Now she's going to offer me a drink. And then she's going to hint that she'd like to get a room, Brandon thought skeptically as he put his arm around the girl. During the slow dance, they got to talking and got to know each other better. As it turned out, the girl's name was Veronica, and to the surprise of the young businessman, she did not behave as he expected. Veronica declined the cocktail that he offered her, and she wouldn't even hint at continuing the evening somewhere a little more intimate. For the first time in his life, Brandon was faced with a girl who his wealth couldn't dazzle. "How about a nighttime ride through the city?" the boy suggested, trying to win Veronica's attention. No, it's late. Let's do that some other time," the girl replied, writing down her phone number on a napkin and handing it to Brandon. Soon Veronica left, and the young man remained seated at the table, feeling the many glances of other young girls around him, hoping to get a little closer to him. There was confusion and bewilderment inside Brandon's head. He could not believe that he finally managed to meet one girl who was not bedazzled by his wealth. In this dreamlike state of reverie, the young man drove himself home. Of course, tormented by his thoughts, Brandon was unaware of the fact that in reality, Veronica simply did not like him. The following day, the young woman told her friend Nancy, who she always shared her deepest feelings with, about her meeting with the young businessman. "You see, he's very rich, a gold Rolex watch on his arm, his own business, house, car. But the heart, as they say, can't help it, especially since he's not my type," Veronica said, feeling proud deep down that she managed to hook a rich man. In her mind, she already saw herself as a regular client at expensive stores and elite beauty salons, with Brandon generously paying her expenses. "Well, it's entirely up to you, girl. But I wouldn't recommend messing around with the guy who has feelings for you and playing cat and mouse with him. I think in this case, it's better to tell the truth and tell it like it is," Nancy advised. Veronica pursed her lips in disdain and shook her head, She understood that her friend was right, but she did not want to lose a wealthy suitor who was loaded with money. But Veronica didn't have to worry for long, because in the evening, Brandon called her and asked her out on a date. Despite the fact that everything went smoothly, a restaurant, a gorgeous bouquet of roses, and a walk under the moon, Veronica felt a sense of awkwardness and artificiality throughout everything that was happening. Veronica felt deep in her heart that, in a little while, Brandon would declare his love to her and offer her to marry him. She realized to her surprise that she was not ready to take such a step. So, to set the record straight, Veronica told Brandon how she really felt about him and that she didn't like him at all, to be perfectly honest. "You're a good guy, Brandon, but unfortunately, we don't have a future together. Believe me, you'll find a normal girl who needs you and not your money," Veronica said as she hugged him amicably. Brandon took the separation hard. Depression came over him with renewed vigor, and the boy locked himself in his room and didn't leave the house for days on end. Brandon only brightened up a little when his concerned father came to see him. "Son, it's time you straightened up and attend to your business. You're a businessman. You can't let a stable income go to waste," Mr. Price said, with emphasis on the last word. Brandon grimaced as he had a toothache, agreeing deep down with his father's words. "Oh, and stop being so sad, and go out and have a good time. You know, to a cafe or a cinema," added Mr. Price, patting his son on the shoulder. But Brandon did not go to a restaurant or a nightclub that day. Instead, he decided to try his father's own method out, and changing into some old clothes, he went to the park, where he hoped to meet a girl. Not having much experience in disguising himself, Brandon walked aimlessly through the shady alley, growing more and more doubtful of his idea. Suddenly, about 50 meters away from him, he saw an upset girl with two unhappy men standing next to her. It was obvious that their conversation was not a friendly one, and judging by the agitated voices of the tipsy lads, something serious was about to happen. Brandon, feeling concerned for the frightened stranger, rushed to her aid. Though the odds were stacked against him, the young businessman, at the cost of a few scrapes and bruises, managed to send the boys fleeing. As it turned out later, they were robbers who wanted to steal the girl's purse and phone. Thank you, and here I was thinking that real men didn't exist anymore," the stranger said, with tears in her eyes. "No, it's okay. Anyone could have done that in my place," Brandon replied, his eyes dropping in embarrassment. To make sure nothing else would happen to the girl he had saved, the young businessman volunteered to walk her home. On their way home, they got to talking, and from the first few minutes of their conversation, they felt an enduring mutual sympathy for each other. Brandon found out that stranger's name was Nancy, and she was a psychologist by profession. Coincidentally, she turned out to be the same Nancy who was Veronica's friend. Upon parting, Brandon decided to kiss the young woman on the cheek and made arrangements to meet her again. Much to the young people's surprise, the date went well, giving Nancy and Brandon hope for a future together. Their relationship began to develop so quickly that the rich boy started appreciating the true meaning of his father's words about love, in which money or financial well-being are not a factor. Brandon also enjoyed living the life of an ordinary man who didn't have expensive jewelry or cars that cost a fortune. The couple took daily walks together in the park, fed the ducks at the lake, and enjoyed cheap hamburgers at the diner on the corner. Slowly, mutual love took hold of the couple's hearts, and things were moving at a rapid pace towards marriage. But the closer this exciting moment approached, the more anxious Brandon became, as he had to confess to his bride that he was not really a repairman at a car service center, but a millionaire businessman. At last, when the whole situation had escalated to the point of no return, Brandon arranged for Nancy to meet him in an expensive restaurant. The girl was very surprised by this posh gesture, especially considering her fiancé's small income. But when Brandon showed up at the restaurant in an expensive car, Nancy couldn't believe her eyes at first, thinking she was mistaken. Brandon then walked with the huge bouquet of flowers in one hand and an engagement ring in the other, as if nothing had happened. Nancy's face instantly flushed and tears welled up in her eyes. She rejected Brandon's proposal, ran out of the restaurant, and instantly disappeared into the crowd. And the new groom, with his head down, stood at an empty table and felt like a fool. After the incident at the restaurant, Nancy flat out refused to see him again, changing her cell phone number, and moved out of her rental apartment. Suffering from pent-up remorse, Brandon wandered the park for hours, hoping to run into Nancy. The depressed young man only had sad thoughts on his mind, and he was contemplating ending his life. No one knows how Brandon's fate would have turned out if he hadn't met Veronica at that same moment. The girl, according to her friend, immediately guessed that Nandy's ill-fated fiancé was Brandon. Veronica felt sorry for Brandon's feelings and promised to help him. Brandon suffered almost a week of harrowing uncertainty before Nancy agreed to work things out with him. Hugging the man she loved, she said, "Darling, remember this. That was the first and last time I forgave you for lying. You need to understand that you cannot start a new relationship with dishonesty, and you will never build a strong family based on lies." These words, however, were needless, because Brandon, who had already fully realized his mistake, was determined to live only by his own wits and never again followed anyone's advice like that in his personal life.